Hey everybody, Anthony here, FSU Off-Road. Welcome back to another video. If it's your first time joining us, welcome you to the channel and welcome you to our 4800 build. Although it don't look like much now, this has been a year in the making. And today, and in this video, we're going to start assembling our TMR chassis for the final time before King of Hammers. It's time to take all of our piles of parts, painted parts, our painted TMR chassis, and get it assembled. Today we have 88 days before qualifying for King of Hammers 2023. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get to it.
I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't that great. I don't wanna go to work, cause my boss is a jerk, and I'm not even that paid. I need a change in my life, cause I don't feel alive, and there's nothing that makes me happy. Hold my beer for a minute, I'm about to quit my job, cash in for a ticket. I'm going on a trip and I don't plan to visit. I'm gonna stay there till I feel like I'm winning, and this is just the beginning. I need a big change, help me feel like living. I need a big swing home.
Before I put the last trailing arm bolt in, I just wanted to show you what I did on these bolts. It's actually a custom bolt. So I wanted the shank to be long enough to go through the actual brackets, that way the threads wouldn't tear into the brackets themselves. So what I did was I actually took a longer bolt, cut it down, and just threaded it down just a little bit to where I wanted it. That way the shank will be the length that I need it for the brackets. And I've done this all the way down. You can see I only did like a 1/4 of an inch or so, it's like really like 3/8 of an inch on thread, and then just cut the excess off to where it was perfectly long enough for the actual brackets, and all the brackets are the same width, so this works. And I did 16 bolts, 16 3/4 inch bolts for the front and rear, and then this one will be a spare. I have to cut this one down, and that way I'll have a spare bolt for keeping it in the spares. But I just wanted to show you guys that these I'd rather have this shank in the brackets, that way the threads don't eat it up and waller it out. And I did that with the trailing arm bolts or the coilover bolts, coilovers all the way around. Not really worried about the limit straps because they're metal, and not super worried about that. But I also did it on the sway bar bolts as well, all the way around, with the 1/2 inch bolts. So a lot of extra tedious work goes into this, but I just wanted to show you because it will save the longevity of your brackets, even with these weld washers. They have repairs, but if you do it like this, you won't have to worry about the repairs in the future. So just take that with you whenever you're building something, or you might be redoing something. You know, making custom bolts will save you in the long run. But I'm gonna finish this up and then we can go on to something else. Well, I started putting things together and I totally forgot where I put bolts and stuff like that. So I'm kind of rummaging around just trying to find small things to put back here, like the bump stops and things like that, because I have to build a stud for the back side of this one, and I was only able to find 4 bolts, so I just used those to bolt it up right now. Once I can get that stud built, or I might just do studs all the way around, front and rear, the back ones will just be shorter. Once I figure that out, I'll be able to put the internal seals in, button everything up, and then I'll be able to do the brakes and things like that. But since I'm not working on that, I'm just doing small stuff. Might do like the fuel cell mount and things like that. I'm going to work on getting the alignment done when I get some tires on here. So I'm just going to do like the brakes and things like that and get some tires on it. That way I can adjust it with it being ride height and the coilovers and things like that, kind of get a better idea. And also I want to have the front done, so I'll do them at the same time to make sure everything does align. Everything's straight with the chassis, but I want to make sure the axles are straight with each other as well. So we'll do that in the future.
And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be? And do you believe you can do anything? But what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be?
Okay, been working here, stopped by the store, grabbed some bolts because I couldn't find some of the bolts that I needed, and went ahead and cut some of the bolts that I need. I'll have to rethread them. A little bit more on the shank, but I had enough to do the complete rear, and I also bought a paint marker, and I'm using the paint marker after I torque down all the bolts. So as you see here, after I torque them down, I'll make a mark on all the bolts. One kind of tells me that I've either put Loctite on them. If there's no locking, like a lock nut or something like that, I'm gonna put Loctite on everything. And I've also torqued them down. So the rear sway bar is completely done. I've also done the main link bolts, the 3/4 link bolts, minus this one. This one's not tightened because this is the only Heim adjustment. So I can only loosen the Heim from there. There's no adjustment up there. The top ones, I have adjustments, so I'm not worried about it. I did pick up some limit strap bolts, things like that. Also cut some more shock bolts or coilover bolts and things like that. Got that all done. Just kind of been fiddling around, trying to find everything that I need. And as I find it, started putting some small pieces on the chassis. But anyways, just kind of been doing that. I'm going to be putting in the front axle probably tomorrow, not today, because I've got to do the bolts. But aside from that, things are going good. Just slow and steady.
Yeah, this is my life, my strife, my right to fight, to die on. And this is my game to play, to claim a brand new name. Oh, and I ain't gonna lie to you, I'm a bit nervous that I might screw everything up that I've ever done. But what's the point of living if you ain't having fun? I guess I'll try this, try that, might miss, gotta find what I'm good at. I guess I look here, look there, over where am I scared, where am I at? I gotta make it in this life, whatever makes me happy, know I'm doing things right. Sipping in the summer on a goose and Sprite, or find a nightclub for the end of the night, oh. And we all got dreams, we all want things, but what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be?
As you saw, we got our front axle in, and we got our link bolts all torqued down. And now I didn't tighten the coilovers rear or front because we'll be taking them on and off. And went ahead and put the ram on there, just kind of sat it on there for now. Also our knuckles, they're not torqued down either. We'll have to do that in the future, but for now they are on there along with the sway bars, bump stops. So the front matches the rear for the most part. Now next thing we got to do is we got to get our unit bearings done. We already have 2 re-drilled for 8 on 6.5. Now I have to do 2 more, and then in the future I'll have to do 2 more, but I'll have at least 4 for now. The ones that we used for mock-up were used exactly for that, mock-up. But I have 2 more that we got to get drilled out, re-drilled, and then the studs pressed back in, and then we can start putting our unit bearings on to get this chassis a complete rolling chassis.
And do you believe you can do anything? But what you gonna do for it? How you gonna move for it? What you gonna be?
As you saw, I just used my template
Use that 1/8 inch drill bit to do the first holes. Then I used a step bit, taking it specifically to 9/16, which is slightly larger than the actual drill bit that you needed. And whenever you start and then the third time you start drilling with the actual size drill bit, by having the 9/16 already kind of counterboard, it actually centers the drill bit on there. So now that we've got both of our unit bearings drilled out, it's time to press our studs back in. To make it a little bit easier, I actually go in and I actually just cut just a little bit of the edge off to allow it to fit better in there, and then we can press it in our new location since it's slightly smaller than the 170mm. So we'll get these all trimmed up, pressed in place, get them painted, and then we'll be ready to get these installed on the axles. Now that I threw a couple layers of paint on it, that way to keep it from rusting, the last thing that I want to do to get these completely assembled is install a grease fitting in the top where the ABS used to go. And if you look close enough, you're not going to be able to see it, but Barnes 4-wheel drive makes a Zerk fitting that fits in there like so, secures down with a little Allen bolt there, and then you'll be able to grease your unit bearings. So I'm going to get these done, and then I'm going to work on getting these installed on the rear and tighten some bolts down, and then we'll be able to move on to the brake portion of this rear axle.
I'm changing who I am. I'm making a new plan, rearranging my life, and I won't look back ever again.
Now you may be wondering why I was cutting the studs and stuff. Well, truth be told, these rear axles were meant for bolts to come from the backside and studs to go from the front. But I want to keep everything the same, and instead of having to carry 2 wrenches, because the bolt is a 22mm and the nut is a 21mm, I just went ahead and used the front studs, and I threaded them extra long on the backside. I used a die tap, threaded it longer, and then I was able to cut the just
length.
a quick overview what we finished last night. Went ahead and got the unit bearings installed with the axle guides in the axle put in there, and then I just went ahead and torqued down all the brake rotor and hats, and then went ahead and installed the calipers and ran the lines, got it all situated, and also found our limit strap. So I went ahead and put it on there, tightened the top bolt, didn't do the bottom bolt because we'll have to remove coilovers and things like that in the future, so just make it easier. Now time to duplicate that same process on this front axle and get it all assembled.
You ain't see me activated. You better hope that you never see me agitated. I think about my actions, plan them out, evaluated. That's how I end up on the top, man, I'm calculated. My mind's a weapon, my body is the engine. I'm never second guessing, I just do what I was destined. Cause I feel I got the blessing, persistence and obsession. That's how you keep progressing, I already learned that lesson, yeah.
Okay, there's a lot of things on this front axle that aren't actually torqued. I did torque most of the things on the rear axle, partly because the internal seals can be pressed from the insides of the pumpkin housing, and then everything else is going to be sealed from the outside, and I can actually install the rear axle shafts from the exterior. Like the front, we're leaving it untorqued. That way we can disassemble this, take the unit bearing out, that way we can install our front shafts when they arrive, and then we can put this all back on and install it all. But now, the next thing I'm going to do is just going to put brake lines, and I'm going to put our steering lines on here. Now that we have the front axle assembled, brake lines, steering, things like that, what I want to do is I want to get the laser out and start taking some measurements to get this axle centered. I went ahead and marked the axle dead center on the back side, and I did it on the rear axle as well. That way I can get it centered with the chassis, as well as getting it squared with the chassis from front to back. So I'm going to be working on that with the laser. Probably use just take some measurements off the chassis, run the laser that way, and then that way I can ideally get it. All the links are secured, but the jam nuts are off, so we'll work on doing that now. That way, whenever we get this thing aligned, we can throw some tires on it and then push our spring retainers down to hold the chassis under its own weight for the first time ever, and we can get rid of the jack stands underneath. So let's knock this out.
I'm changing who I am. I'm making a new plan, rearranging my life, and I won't look back ever again. You can't stop what's moving. You can't stop what's moving.
One of the things I did when I built this, I kind of got it close when I built it, and then when I went to paint these links, actually I didn't unthread them all the way out. I just loosened the nuts and then taped them all off and painted them. So I knew it was going to be really close, and it really was. Just a few changes. I had to move the axle towards the passenger side about 1/4 of an inch, and then this side was a little bit longer, so I had to shorten it and lengthen the other side to kind of make them match a little bit better. But everything is in within a 1/16 of an inch. The housing is 90 degrees here. I got a plumb bob with it marked around the center. That way I can get a good center point with the mark on the axle housing. I know it's hard to see, but marked it there. I was able to check through there with the plumb bob. Then I just made like a random mark here that was 12 inches from both sides of the chassis. That way it just made it easier to make alignment, to get alignment marks from the actual housing itself. So everything is literally within 1/16 of an inch. This side right here is 26 and a 1/16, same as the other side. And then now what I can do is I can go in and start tightening all these jam nuts, get them nice and secured, mark them, and then I can go back again and mark everything after I double checked and triple checked everything. But now that the front axle is done, time to move on the rear axle. I'm going to do the same thing. Not going to worry about filming it, but we're just going to make another mark and then center it up on the chassis with a plumb bob and then get that all set. Much like the front, the back went together very close to original dimensions. I did have to make a few changes. Went ahead and torqued all the bolts down, jam nuts. Went ahead, made my marks on all the jam nuts. And just for purposes, fitment purposes, I went ahead and threw tires on there, just threw a few lug nuts on each of the tires. That way you can kind of sit and you can kind of get a good glimpse of what it looks like. Now, the last thing that I want to do is I want to push these lock collars down and put some pressure on these springs on our coilovers. That way we can eliminate our jack stands down here and get this thing in its final resting place as a rolling chassis with no more jack stands. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to basically be jacking the chassis up back there with our jack to get the chassis to raise up, and then we'll put some pressure as this extends. I'll press these down on the slider here, and then it'll actually keep pressure off that. And then once it gets close enough to where I can take those jack stands out, we'll take the jack stands out. This will be a completely rolling chassis, and we'll wheel it out and then we'll show you guys what we got.
You deserve to be great. I know it feels like things get in your way. Push through those walls and the others will fall. Sit up, stand tall, you can get through it all. I need some energy, anxiety's no friend to me. I have a short memory, I don't really remember things. That's how I move on, that's how I stay strong. A new day's on, I'll keep moving right along.
Well, for the first time in a year, I was able to wheel this thing out under its own weight. Man, how good does it look? It's really turning out nice.
And I feel like the pain in the past, it needs to stay in the past. You gotta take off the cast. I wanna feel like I'm a new person. I wanna have clear vision and purpose. And I feel like the pain shouldn't last. If you can move on and past the things that make you feel bad, and you can change in your brain, I'm certain. I've done it before and man, I'm not perfect.